Hello, everybody. Mr. J here today, coming up with a different little idea. I've been teaching now digitally online for almost 2.5 years now, and always starting my courses overseas with my students, whether they are taking American history or something in world history. And I have a general overview slideshow that I use with them, and I thought, why not have people around here benefit from that? It's an interesting way to introduce many of the topics that you would study in an in-depth history class. So, without any more ado, let's just jump right in. If you want to learn something about history and the pursuit of truth, come along. This will be a fun little walk. But always asking the kids, where do you think all of this started? How did all this begin? Why are we here? What happens when we die? What is the meaning of life? All of these big, big questions is one of the first, most fun places to start thinking about the impact of the subject matter that they're about to like engage in, perspective and point of view. So, great questions to get them thinking. Do you believe that there's life out there? Where did philosophy come from? Where does the study of religion come from? How do we get our moral values? All of those ideas, fun things to start talking about with kids at any level. I have found through elementary school all the way through high school, they all love addressing the big picture questions. They're the most engaging things to talk about. Um, and then what questions do people have about the world today? Clearly, we are living through a very historic time. I might even say that a few times in this presentation, but we're living through a time of massive change. Some would call it a renaissance, some might call it a dark age, and some might call it a great awakening. You know, it really depends on who you're in discussion with these days. And we can talk about that as this unfolds as well. In that point of view, relationships matter. How we see the world matters. Do you look at the world through generally a spiritual lens, or are you more secular in nature? Were you brought up in a irreligious or non-religious household? Are you brought up agnostic, or do you really believe in a certain faith? Is understanding yourself and your own point of view and what has helped create that will give you a different perspective on understanding not only yourself, but then other people that you'll interact with. So, really great way to get them thinking about that question. And then the relationship between age and wisdom, I guess. From the student perspective, they are the budding Jedi's, so to speak. They are engaged and they want to know more about the world. And then that inner voice that all human beings have when you talk to yourself, most people that would, I guess they might equate that with talking to God, that so that your soul you are in constant conversation with, and your conscience, I'll put that out there, is the scene I love to use with my students is Return of the Jedi, and where Obi-Wan comes back as the spirit explaining some of these things. And one of the things he says in that scene is, Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths that we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. So we need to understand ourselves even before you can begin to contemplate trying to understand other people. So the final layer in that relationship would be the teacher or the master, so to speak. Pretty good with the force, okay? And pretty good are teachers in their particular discipline or subject matter. Uh, I don't claim to know it all. I actually claim to continue to be shocked at the level of my own ignorance at times, even in historical knowledge. But I don't think, in comparison, that you guys might say that by the end of this journey. But that is really a journey toward supreme humility when you realize how much we don't know, and and how that probably should guide our thoughts and actions a little more than it does with absolute certainty on things that we really don't understand. But we are all mortal beings, to the best of my knowledge, and so we will have an end time, and that is the commonality we all share is death. So let's look at the meaning of life. If you want to try to understand the world around you today, it helps to understand bigger concepts. So I talk a lot about concepts, and there's no reason you would study the past if you're not interested in understanding the present or trying to predict the future. Other than that, it would just be you could read fiction. But instead, reading historical nonfiction can really help you understand what's happening today, the interests and all of these things, and can help you maybe make predictions into the future. So, globalism versus nationalism is a scope I like to have the kids try to unpack the chaos sometimes or disorder in the world today with the struggles going on currently between those that want to have greater centralized authority and control over everything, which is highlighted by the United Nations, the concept of NATO, the IMF, the World Bank, the WHO, and all of the trade partnerships and relationships, or a world that is embracing more of national sovereignty and not to forfeit your rights and all that to a global governing body. We could go into many different paradigms of discussion on this. You could start talking about Orwell in 1984. You can bring in your Assange and Snowden and so many things we could talk about. And we could talk about the pros and cons of that. But that's not the topic of this discussion. This discussion is to try to show you how to engage people at a high level and show you where the tangents are that you can go off on. But in order to understand details and the meaning of details, they have to be put in some kind of a proper context. And this, what to do with power, centralize it more or spread it out more, is the concept I like to look at with this. And that the mineral wealth of the world is largely our point of view and perception. What value, from an economic or monetary standpoint, does a particular place in the world have? And how that may drive policy at times, right? So, more perspective. And this is the subject of a whole nother short video that I just put together on the history of American banking. But really, this isn't to understand the power hierarchy in your own civilization and how it is organized and who at the end of the day or what groups have the most influence within your system, whatever it may be, because the pyramid of hierarchical power is the same across all time, as you'll see here briefly. It has only been since the end of World War II that the United States has become the world's preeminent military hegemonic power, if you will, to use that fancy term. But uh, perspective, Egypt was around 3,000 years. The United States is now in its 240 some odd year of existence. So do we have all of that time left to remain at the peak of our civilization, even though we'll see Egypt did ebb and flow itself through power uh, periods of greater prosperity and less, and maybe even greater things in the ancient past that we'll take a look at here in a moment. But get the kids thinking about competition in the world, and to what extent is that competition avoidable, unavoidable? It is really important to look at the history in a real way and see how our own policy has impacted other people's in the world's perspective of, in particular, the United States, but the same rule applies across all nationalities. How does the impact of U.S. foreign policy and largely the United States military and the CIA and different three-letter agencies within our domain, within our nation, and beyond our shores has intervened in policy and wars and assassination attempts and all of these things and election manipulations all throughout our history. So that is no secret. That's no secret piece of information. You can go research those on your own. The other point of view is students should understand the way that people perceive the world is by the measurement of time. And so that we understand that our calendar, the way that we understand time in the world today, is based on the Roman world. So, whatever legacy came from the Roman Empire, which ultimately meant power within the Church of Rome, that became who got to tell people in the Western world, which becomes the part of the world that makes a lot of these rules, and that how do they tell time? And why did they go from why does the West start at BC and actually have a zero and move forward? People don't even, some of them have no idea where that, some of the students might be, they don't even know why that is the case, because many more young people are grown up without a even a religious historical understanding of what's going on, largely because, and it's part of the problem with our school system, is even a historical discussion of religion is often taboo. So really, if you're not going to be studying even the historical belief systems of different civilizations, how can you sit there and assess and learn more about that culture or civilization in a, for example, a high school classroom, if you can't talk about their values and how they developed? I mean, it's just, it's made this element of education a little bit more interesting and fun for me. So, because we get to explore a little bit greater truth, possibilities, and questions. So, let's see what's next here. We usually begin with when civilization writing begins. So, when can a civilization call itself as such? When writing begins and record keeping. Because interestingly, though, that's when the narrative begins to get crafted. So, and right away, we'll talk to the students about whomever gets to write the history gets to sort of tell you what the actual message of history was at that time. And then you can look and see if that changed over time. That's another vantage point people need to look at the subject of history and the discipline of history with, is whom or who is getting to tell the story. Generally speaking, it's going to be the winning side of history, whatever that may be. Others. Let's see. The ancient world, the pre-biblical world, the pre-Egyptian, Sumerian, Mesopotamian civilizations still have a lot of clues, and we are making more and more discoveries these days about ancient archaeology that is throwing the way people are needing to comprehend human development. History is being prepared as we live right now to be rewritten and re-understood on a lot of different levels. And the curriculum people of the future, and I hope to be a part of that, have a very interesting task ahead, because many of the truths that we had clinged to, as Obi-Wan said, many of those truths are just going to have to be re-understood, and we will go through a human species re-education understanding of our own development of history in this world. It's kind of exciting, really, but it can be troublesome to people who may have had a rigid thought process their whole lives, and who are now being confronted with greater truths that are testing the limits of their tolerance, really. So, good stuff. So, looking at those civilizations and when they emerge over time, and like we mentioned, the Roman world here, so that's going to be essentially the modern era, is based largely on the legacy of the Roman world. And this is the Gregorian calendar, and the nations of the world in blue that adhere to that calendar for economic and understandings, and largely that's what how the world often connects today. So all of the different points of view that have created you as an individual, and then you then cast out to the civilization that you are a part of, influences are abound. um, do you see the world in your point of view as an ongoing battle or negotiation, or whatever the case is, between good and evil? Do you believe in the concepts of good and evil? Asking kids to contemplate those questions really gets their minds going. And then, if you do, what should be done about it? Should evil be allowed to exist? To what extent? All these different levels of thought. And then having an image for them to try to explain how these slide together. Do often many of the students I teach already know how to play chess. So they have an interesting background of understanding different pieces on the board have different capabilities. But interesting that this artist is perceiving that those faceless pieces are all actually the same, and we're all pawns in the game. And that the hands that do move us around in this universe, there are people within our civilization that are simply allowed to know more than other people. So that's a big idea to get across to students right away. So the engineers of your civilization, whomever the power players are, how are you, the citizen, involved in their enterprises? To what extent are you actually free? And to what extent are you actually dependent, or are you interdependent with those systems? So that exploration of that stuff can take some understanding and unpacking. But challenging science is a normal routine in the Western world only until this time that we are living through right now. So it used to be okay to question things a little bit more to a greater degree. We'll say post the Industrial Revolution. But now, today, since I suppose many of the answers have been given, that looking at the Big Bang Theory as an actual fact, and there's no other option, and somehow a Big Bang in the universe created the millions and 2 million species of living entities on one planet amongst all those hundreds of billions of planets and suns and stars, then it's pretty crazy ignorant to think that there's no other plausible reality. And then the idea that DNA itself was discovered in 1973 by brilliant scientists, and now we had a code to look at. Well, when you start discussing codes within genetics and DNA, the question philosophically will arise. Where did the code come from? Now, that code, that simple, fun question, can be a question that makes people stop and think deeply. And even within the world, I can understand the bringing these questions up can be a lot for people to take in. But we are living in a pretty stressful time. And we see kids, and a lot of young kids, struggle for greater meaning and purpose. And the tactic that has seemingly been used by leaders is to withhold having people think about complex and difficult things and delay their exposure to harder realities. So, and then the consequences of that have been, sadly, increased depression, anxiety, and young people committing suicide. So I've chosen this path of trying to explore truth because I truly believe that young people do want to do that. And they really wish adults would be more honest with them about its pursuit. So the institutions that have provided these answers in the past have always been religion, organized religion, and your religious leaders, and then governments. They provide answers to how did we get here and what is all this about. Okay. Now people are actually starting to maybe enjoy going on that journey for themselves. And, we'll talk about all of this and how that's a great spiritual journey in and of itself. But the mythologies of the world are so fun to study. And then when you really start looking back and seeing the symbolism of the ancient world and you lay it over, like I'll show you here in a little bit, you've got what appears to be like a DNA strand or interrelated serpents or however you want to understand this as you'll see it. But the oldest mythological story is that we came from the sky people or the sky gods. Well, asking a class, do you think that's literally gods? Or do you think it could be another species of any kind? Could it have been something from the time traveling past? Is it something, to try to answer these questions and talk about the hypotheses is so fun to do. And looking for the patterns of interrelationship, even in ancient history, is great. We've all heard of the myth in Pandora's box and understanding that Greece came before the writing of the Bible. then you can see, maybe you understand where the idea of forbidden fruit and knowledge came from. Now, I just put something in that world out of order for some people there, and I might have challenged the belief structure right there, but that's okay. We'll talk about more of that here momentarily. But spirituality and religion, looking at this as a difference, we clearly would know that best example of this would be the history of the Roman Catholic Church. It had its times of good and times of really, really bad and scary type of evil. And we all know this. We don't need to go into all that. But that is the organized institution of religion. If we want to go back to the Jesus and Pharisees story, we can look at it there too. Organized religion and the religious leaders bear a big time difference between the individual spirit of a human being and, as Jesus would have said, the individual within you that needs to be aware of God's impact in the world and how you can make an impact in the world. So understanding that reality takes you back on an ancient historical spiritual journey that is kind of fun. How do you get that across, that major, I guess, essence of a spiritual idea, that you matter in this universe? You're here for some sort of reason, even though we might not know what that is. But these are all of the mythology starting points. There's commonality in the human race and human species across all domains. Let's look at each other's journeys. And point of view, folks, there's people out there, right? And who am I to say that conspiracy theories, we'll talk about all that stuff. But that is a term that is made up to belittle people that were questioning the Kennedy assassination. So once you absorb that reality, that the word conspiracy theory as applied to how it was massively used by the press after the 1963 assassination, you can realize that conspiracies are actually, many of them are turning out to be more true. So, not that I'm saying this is, because I do not know, but there are people out there that still believe the earth is flat, or more people that believe it's flat now than believed it was flat before. Okay. This demonstrates the impact of alternative theories and the internet. There's people that believe there's an inner earth. And there are points of view in this world where people hold steadfast that is the case. And then when you start digging into history and you look up Admiral Richard Byrd, is a great rabbit hole for you to go down. You look at the fact that many world leaders visit Antarctica for some reason, and you have to ask yourself, why is that the case? Why did the Germans send 40,000 women down there in 1942 to meet up with the 40,000 men that were already there? When you start getting into those realities and then tighten it up with the classic mythology of the ancient past, you might be a step closer to understanding that truth. But since science has given us all the answers and said that we came from apes and that's the end of it, end of discussion, you've been provided the truth that evolutional theory is real, and you can stop asking questions now. But what I just showed you hopefully contradicts the naivete of that approach and the level of thought you'll actually be able to achieve. This one will knock your socks off for a lot of people, including myself. Raised as a Christian young man and still go to Bible study, have a great spiritual journey when I'm there. But as a historian as well, we have to keep in mind that the Bible was literally constructed by the end of the Roman Empire by three groups of people. The Romans and Constantine, who wanted Christianity to become the religion of the empire. The Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, for lack of a better term on this, that were part of the Roman Empire and had the historical texts and traditions, as well as Christian scholars and bishops as well. So three big groups are in Rome to write and construct the Bible. From ancient texts and from ancient writings, and then some writings um, around that time period. And then some of those books did not make it, for the Apocrypha, did not make the final cut into the Bible. And then when you start to add the layers of King James got to translate the first Bible in English, and you realize that happened in the Renaissance years, and that when you translate something from its language, sometimes it might lose words or meaning, or if you are somebody who wants to translate things and manipulate things, you can do that too. If you approach the learning within Scripture with all of these antennae up, and with all of these abilities to question up, you can even glean greater truth from it. One of the greatest lessons I think I got out of Bible study was God fears no question that you have. I truly believe that. So that's why I love asking them all. Okay? But when you start looking at the world and the history that we know of that is recorded, it begins with the Epic of Gilgamesh being the first epic story. Historically, to the best of my guessing ability here, it's maybe Epic of Gilgamesh is written 4000 BC, maybe 5000 BC. And that story within it talks of the ancient flood story. It talks about a meaning of life. It talks about a Garden of Eden. Now, and then we just go down the line. The next in historical development in Mesopotamia is Sargon of the Akkadians. And you understand in that mythology, Sargon was an orphan in a basket put in the Euphrates River. And he was found by a wonderful princess. Sounds very similar, okay, to the Moses story. Hammurabi's code, eye for an eye. That's literally what one of the codes was. That idea is also within. I'm not going to say which one. You guys can read all this. The concept of human sacrifice, something that happened all over the world in the ancient times. Why? Well, that's in the Abraham versus Isaac story. And Abraham from Ur is the same thing as Abraham being from Ur. It connects all the regions. Then the story can begin to put its tentacles out there and touch every part of the ancient world. The laws of Ma'at in ancient Egypt are 42. The Hebrews chose 10. God chose 10. However you want to interpret that, okay? The ideas of hermetic principles and follow the way, the truth. Is there a way that we should understand our own spirituality? Is there something that the Egyptians understood in the ancient past? If you explore hermetic principles, very interesting exploration of that ancient Egyptian knowledge. Thoughts, prophecy, if you get a chance on that, that's ancient Egyptian. Then you can look at the idea that that story mirrors the Revelation story in the Bible. Zoroaster being a prophet and a savior figure with many, many like features to Jesus. And he existed in the Persian Empire prior, even all the way back to 1500 BC. The idea of the Vedas with ancient flying vehicles, and the Bible in Genesis speaking of that, where the Enoch gets to ascend to heaven on a flying wheel. Okay, these stories are in all of our traditions, and they're in all of the religious traditions around the world. That actually demonstrates, I think, what more Jesus was talking about, the commonality between all of mankind. That's what it seems to demonstrate to me. We all have a shared ancient past. It would be fun to explore it with this sort of open-minded nature. Anyway, just something to think about. But what you notice in this from the Western point of view is that if you don't know any of the ancient past, and you just assume that everything in the Bible is as it is supposed to be and how it was written, and that human beings had no part in that at all, That's a choice that you get to make for yourself, but you might lose the opportunity to evaluate the deeper spiritual meaning and truth that maybe God has in store for us. So that's kind of the way that I look at it. I approach my exploration of truth with all of these questions because I think it appeals to young people across every single discipline and every single faith. If for no other reason, then they might want to try to prove themselves right. And this is an okay relationship to have. It allows us to get to a better place of truth. That the world can be divided into economic, political, and social categories, that when students are trying to categorize all of this information that they have to learn, what's an easier way to organize the mountains and mountains and mountains of historical information? And usually it's economics, haves in the society versus the have-nots and wherever that fits in between. Political being how much power should a government have, any government, and how much power should the citizens have, and what is that relationship? Okay. What does it look like? What's it based on? And then social values. What is right or good versus what is wrong or evil? What is your society? Where did they start drawing that Hammurabi's code or those 10 commandments or the laws of Ma'at between right and wrong? Okay. And how do you address problems of the such fundamental nature as what the right to life and the abortion issue and pro-choice movement has in the definition of that discussion? Now you understand the impact of having that discussion between right and wrong and good and evil, or somewhere on that spectrum of tolerance, if one exists. Okay. That is also a way to understand what motivates people throughout history. So economics, politics, and these social journeys. That all civilizations that are complex have a system of belief and an organized system of government and specialists. And this all became normal in civilization after the advent of settled agriculture. And then I say to the students right away, if you want to understand who has power in your civilization, every single civilization is organized in a pyramid structure of hierarchy. However, the lines end up being drawn is completely up to that civilization to determine for itself. And that responsibility, wherever you think those lines should be drawn, is also up to the people themselves at the end of the story. And it really depends on how much people are willing to accept and what they value within their society at that particular point in time. But, the pyramids are all over the world, and new pyramids are being discovered every now and again by archaeologists in the strangest of places. So I love to use this as a journey of possibilities in the ancient historical world. Is there a time when the ancient past perhaps knew one another? We are told that they had no idea about each other. Civilizations of the Maya never talked to civilizations in Egypt, or something like that. But when you look at the evidence and what the internet is allowing us to discuss, are these topics without having the topics defined by the experts. So when you get to look at side-by-side comparisons of some of the pyramid layouts and you say, wow, that's coincidental. Oh, is it just coincidental? Or might there be a reason for this? And a reason that we do not understand, but that might be fun to understand, might be helpful to understand, only if you're in the pursuit of truth. So there's obelisks from the ancient Egyptian world all over the world, including right in front of the Vatican and in Washington, D.C. The connection to ancient Egypt and civilization, what is it? How deep does it go? What was the ancient world? Was really all those pyramids is tombs? These questions are getting addressed. The symbolism of the ancient world showing up throughout the mythology that we all are aware of. Secret societies, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, all words that we hear. but we often don't know what to do with them all because we're hit with so many of them. How many are real? What's real? Are there good people within these things and bad people? The answer to all of this requires exploration. Frankly, we just don't go on the exploration very often. Or if we do, we just absorb somebody's documentary on that, and then we think we know that now as truth. But we're learning more about history that actual documentaries that maybe we were brought up on might not actually be 100% true. So this requires a very, very open and a spiritual center to reassess things you thought you knew requires a spiritual groundedness. You have to know yourself. And the links that you'll get to see within the study of the past that are understandable, but really at the end of that journey still only understandable in the pursuit of truth and humility. But astrology is a fun place to go. Why does it seem anytime that you look at your horoscope, you can figure something out in there that sounds similar? Or if you've ever taken a journey on a real astrological understanding, there are some really neat concepts. How the heck did that work? And if you are not curious about that, right? If you would rather spend your time watching Netflix instead of trying to understand the zodiac or what it could have meant to the ancient people, it's really going to be hard to pursue truth or deal with challenges to the things that you believe. So, and then you'll just ignore those things. Okay. And maybe our civilization is at that crossroads and that point. Do we really want to know? Do we want to have that knowledge? Anyway, you can see it in the ancient symbolism, whether it's, and this, if my math teacher would have done this a long time ago, I might have actually thought, wow, this is unreal, actually. Maybe it would want me to motivate, it would have had me be a little more motivated to try or see that connection. But the idea of ancient geometric patterns and then the identification of those patterns throughout ancient sites in the whole world, and then Da Vinci's drawing in the Renaissance of the flower of life. Are you the slightest bit curious as to what spiritual significance that is? If you're not, then it's really hard to get excited about anything in the study of discipline of history. These things are everywhere in the world. And ironically, they show up sometimes in fields of grain. This always blows the kids away. They've heard of it. They've heard of crop circles, but they dismiss it as just conspiracy, But really, it's hard. It's really hard to dismiss all of these as hoaxes, conspiracies. So I know people will try, but the answers I have just aren't satisfactory. And then when you look at even more and more and more ancient history, you realize, and this is even you can discover these truths in your textbook as well. Depends on how you're reading that textbook. But the textbook even says there's been 17 different ice ages in the Earth's past, geologists. So many students might enter this world thinking there's only been one before, and if we're not careful, we're going to go through it again, and we are going to be the full cause of that. And then they're going to back policies throughout the entire world that will suppress liberty of any kind for a climate agenda that they moderately understand. Anyway, when you look at this and you see that buried beneath, in some cases, hundreds of feet of water are ancient ruins from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean. And the simple existence of these archaeological facts should humble people to an ancient past that we don't totally understand. Was there an Atlantis? Was there maybe even more than an Atlantis? And perhaps were there Atlantises before Atlantis? Sure. Ancient sites are the best way to get these ideas out there. Okay. There are legends of giants throughout most mythologies of the world. There is the discussion in mythologies of symbolism and traveling and flying. Well, and then there's things that all look the same across the ancient world. What was the idea for the handbag? Are those giants real? Were they real? It seems that there are a lot of things out there in the ancient past that are so fun to question. This journey of understanding historical truth can really make life a lot more fun to live. Anyway, Deer and Kiryu, great place that I discovered. I think I only heard of that the first time watching Ancient Aliens. But then I began researching, and it's really an interesting place. Okay. The Nazca lines in Peru, only discovered after people started flying around. And I think 1927 might have been the first identification of those from the sky and what they sort of looked like. And that's how new we are into our understanding of that. Another thing I think I picked up off that Ancient Aliens show when it was on, found it fascinating at times with all that ancient history, but I never knew about this place in my previous study of history. Nobody ever told me that stones had been seemingly cut with a lot more complex tools than hammers and chisels. That boring holes out of solid granite is part of that. That probably would have made me question a lot more as a young person. Now I'm just questioning it more as an adult. Anyway, the ancient past, lots of stuff, right? We can talk for days. Stonehenge, but all the way to the Georgia Guidestones. And then we've all just lived through a time where somehow those mysteriously blew up. And how much follow up did we get on that? Follow up coverage? Anyone? No, no follow up coverage. Okay. We still don't even know what its total purpose was. We can guess. Okay. But still in the dark. The world of crystal skulls. They exist. Some of them are legit, some of them are fake. But how do you explain what the meaning of those things were? How do you explain the discovery of oblong shaped heads? How do you explain this and then you realize a truth that Egyptians sometimes had their folks drawn in that same way? How do you explain all of this? This would be a fun journey for a lot of people. I mean, the giant story goes back to David and Goliath, too. The Smithsonian's already had to admit destroying bones from giants. Why? If you're not curious, what journey are you on? Actually, maybe it's whose journey are you on? But I love that, right? Just so many anomalies in that past. So apparently I'm getting a lot of messages right now. But anyway, the Fertile Crescent, where this all begins. Okay. I hope this. Oh, wait, I got a couple more, I guess, here. We are told the civilization begins in that Fertile Crescent. But the things that I showed you, and even in this PowerPoint, some have been in Turkey, some have been on the other side of the world in Peru and Bolivia. There's sites discovered all the time that are destroying the historic story and narrative we've been provided with. It's not necessarily any individual's fault, but it is a reality. And it's one that'll probably need to be changed. To the best of our knowledge, this is the story we are told and the order with which it had happened. So anytime that you are going to challenge what you are given, science or historical narrative, with new ideas, new hypothesis, and new information. You have to know what it is you're challenging as well. So to question things, we need to be knowing what we're questioning. So that's another perspective we have to look at to understand history the best way we can. But literally, I mentioned this earlier. If only within our pop culture you become more aware that human sacrifice is and or was, definitely was, I pray that everything that I've heard about this isn't happening. I pray that it comes back as propaganda. Um, but if it's not, history actually shows that human sacrifice happened a lot. So for me to think that it's completely made up right now, that's a harder thing for me to do, especially since I'm not given answers in the world on people like a Jeffrey Epstein or something like that, right? We don't have answers on that. We have carrots that were dangled out in front of the population, but we don't have answers. And some of them are of such a big magnitude that um, to believe everything else we're told at that point is more challenging, you know. At least for me, it is. Okay. But different sites. That one, Gobekli Tepe in the ancient past. That one of the first one that sort of blew a hole a little bit in the ancient past's narrative, as it has been dated at pre Sumerian. So, and then the world of ancient knowledge, is that Pandora's box? Is it the tree of knowledge? Is it the apple that shouldn't have been eaten? What is it, and how did that ancient knowledge get handed down? Okay, it used to get handed down on stone tablet in cuneiform or hieroglyphics, and then it began to be scrolled down. And so those ancient scrolls, where were they kept? They were kept in ancient libraries in all different parts of the ancient world. Some of them you can still access today. Um, but we are told in our older history classes that define Western civilization that everything burned. At least I was told this. That everything was burned. The lost knowledge at the Library of Alexandria was so sad that we lost all of the ancient knowledge. And I remember thinking, oh, that's horrible. That stinks. You know? But do you really think that all of the ancient knowledge was burned? Or is that just what we were told? Because then you couple the reality of you can't go and check out any book you want from the Vatican secret library. You're not allowed. So, and I guess if you subject your will to the Pope as the intermediary between you and God, as what Catholic tradition suggests, he is the arbiter of that relationship. He says you can't go in the library, you can't go in the library. And most people would believe that. But it came a point in time in history where Martin Luther said to the Catholic Church, you know, you're selling heaven for gold. And I have to make a conscious choice to break away from you because that's evil. Same way Jesus was flipping tables, right? To the money lenders, of the money lenders, in ancient times. Okay? So these struggles have been going on. And let's not forget, we can pull this all back together now in one big thing and then just say goodbye. And I've probably done a little bit more with you guys than I have with my intro classes, but you know, that's because I'm usually interacting with them. But let's say as we bring this back full circle, what is our point of view? How is it constructed? What do we believe in? Why do we believe it? If you can understand that the lens with which we look at the world through is a Western style lens, and you understand that the Western civilization was established by the Roman Empire, connecting itself to some of the Greek tradition, not talking about the Egyptian tradition, because that part is different, or it might get you closer to truth. But then the other part of Western tradition is the Renaissance and Enlightenment. And so you're talking about when it started and the putting together of the original text of Western civilization, which is the Bible, by the Romans, by the Jewish leaders, and by the Christian leaders of the time. And theirs is the point of view that got to sort of become the dominant point of view. Now, there's struggles and factioning within those groups too. And there's good people within those groups, and there's really bad people within those groups. But I love the study of history so I can try to discern for myself what this truth actually is. And all of these truths, okay? So that's a humble approach, but in order to take an approach of genuine humility, you have to admit all the things that you don't know. But you also have to know, are there people that know things that say you're not allowed to know them? I've just never liked that relationship. I've never found that to be something that I can settle with. That some people get to know more than me. Maybe that's my ego. Or maybe it's God telling me to pursue that truth. That's how I'm choosing to interpret it. So take care. See ya.